Remember I said this was an example of perfect competition?
Right.
As as output is increasing, as quantity is increasing, what's happening to that?
Remains constant?
It remains constant.
Got
Right.
it.
Because every time you sell that next pizza, you're making the same amount of extra revenue. That's not true necessarily for some of the other markets, but for pure competition it is.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So we're going to go ahead. We need to touch on the very last type of market structure, and that's the oligopoly. Do you remember how is an oligopoly different from the other three?
Maybe I would say it has less competitors than a perfect competition arena. And more competitors than a monopoly. Is it in between the two then?
Yep, it's between monopolistic competition and monopoly. So it's ruled by a few. The market is ruled just by a few major companies.
Yeah.
You know, like the soda industry, like the airline industry, the car industry. There are some minor, people can tinker in their garage, or there's, Jolly Good and some other small soda manufacturers, but, it's dominated by just a few firms. Now, first of all, there's something called a balanced oligopoly. Nope. And an unbalanced oligopoly.
Can I get a donut?
You didn't have one yet?
No, I
Oh, sure. In a balanced oligopoly, you've got four firms out of maybe 8 major ones that dominate the market, but none of them is the superstar, the godfather, etc. If this is airlines, like this might be United, and this might be Delta, this might be American, and this might be Southwest or something like that. There are other airlines you can fly, but these are the main 4, and they're fairly close together. In an unbalanced oligopoly, there is a godfather. There is a dominant company that dominates the market. In this case, it's 50% just one company. And this is somewhat important because it's going to talk about, again, the amount of competition that is going to take place within that market. This might be internet browsers. Company 1 might be Microsoft Internet Explorer. Let's say that 50% of all internet browsers used in America are Internet Explorer, and then you might have like Netscape Navigator or Firefox or Chrome or whatever. They have a much smaller piece of the pie, but they're all looking to that one big company that kind of dominates the market. So balanced versus unbalanced. Some people fear that America is, and other countries, are becoming more oligopolistic. We're becoming more dominated by just a few big companies. We talk about Walmart, we talk about big companies that dominate industries. This looks at one of the reasons for that, the increase in mergers. And we had great deregulation and allowing for more mergers, more consolidation of industry, starting in the 70s, and especially around this time right here, early 80s, Ronald Reagan, the Republican Revolution, they deregulated airlines, they deregulated trucking, banking, all these to try to create more competition. Green Bay, our airport, Austin Straubel Field, we used to have just one airline called North Central Airlines, I think it was, that served us. And it was set that way by the government basically to ensure at least we had one. But then when they deregulated, now North Central had to compete against all other airlines, and we do have a few now in Green Bay, other ones. But in the same token, we have many fewer total airlines in the United States. And this has continued certainly on through the 20 years after that. What's the problem with mergers? Well, the more and more consolidation, the fewer firms that dominate the market, you tend to have a price that goes up, an equilibrium price, and you get almost near monopoly conditions. You don't need to know this four-firm concentration ratio, but what that is a formula. The higher this formula is, the more it is dominated by a few firms. So as you get more domination by fewer firms, you can see here that you tend to get higher price on average for whatever it is that you sell. And you start to get prices that approach monopoly levels. Because as we'll see, sometimes we have companies in oligopoly that will work together. They'll try to fix prices because it benefits all of them. And in reality, then in a way, it's almost like it's not even an oligopoly. It's because they're all working in on it together. It's almost like they are a monopoly. All right. There's two then possible situations for oligopoly. The first one is when you tend to have an unbalanced oligopoly, one that's dominated by one company. The example here is chocolate industry. Imagine that D is the demand curve for all chocolate. DH is the demand for Hershey's chocolate. And Hershey's is the godfather of chocolate. And Hershey's controls 1/4 of all, in this example, 1/4 of all of the chocolate sales, revenue, demand, whatever, in society. So here's the marginal cost curve for the entire industry, and then MCH is just Hershey's marginal cost curve, and then MRH is going to be Hershey's marginal revenue. So what happens in Godfather is everybody watches the Godfather to see what they do. And then they just follow suit because they're such a dominant company. In the Godfather, they all watch to see what they do. And then they follow suit. And that includes prices. So what happens is Hershey's, they kind of get to set the market price for chocolate. They make the decision because they're so dominant. So we, once again, MR equals MC, just like everything else. We look for MR equals MC, and they intersect for Hershey's right here. So we know that Hershey's is going to want to maximize its profit by producing 5 tons of chocolate. And then, like we do with monopolistic competition and monopoly, we go up to the demand curve, and this tells us what they will be able to charge when they produce 5 tons. It's going to be $5 a ton. So if they are the godfather, the entire market is going to wait to see what they do. And now we see that Hershey's has decided to produce 5 tons of chocolate at $5. Well, that's what the rest of the market's going to do. They're going to also play along, and we're going to go with this $5 price for a ton of chocolate. For the industry, the entire industry with this demand curve, at $5 a ton, we know that they're going to produce, or they're going to be able to sell 20 tons of chocolate. The 15 represents the other firms in the market. The 20 is the total. The 5 is Hershey's. 5 plus the 15 for everybody else equals the 20. Questions? Pretty straightforward. You look at you in the Godfather oligopoly, figure out the Godfather, what they're going to do, and then just see what that means for the demand curve for the entire industry. There's another kind of weird factor, you may or may not run into it, you might, is the idea, some economists say that an oligopoly actually has a kinked demand curve like this. And this is going to lead us to another important element of an oligopoly, because they do watch each other very closely. There are 2 different demand curves here. The demand curve YY is the demand curve for a company that, where the other companies, let me make sure I say this right. Demand curve YY is if all of the other firms copy this company. The example here is, let's do Hershey's again. No, we can't because we use, that's a Godfather oligopoly. The example in the book here is Lipton iced tea, so this is iced tea. If all the other iced tea companies raise their price and lower their price along with Lipton, then the demand curve for Lipton will be YY. It's going to be relatively inelastic. As long as when you raise your price, everybody else raises their price, your demand for your product isn't going to change that much, right? Yes, fewer people buy iced tea at higher prices because of the law of demand, but you're not going to lose, like because of the substitution effect, you're not going to lose customers to other iced teas because they also raise their price. If you lower your price, yes, your quantity demanded will increase some because more people will buy it at a lower price, but you're not able to steal customers from the other iced tea companies because they also lowered their price. So YY shows a very inelastic demand curve for Lipton if companies follow suit with what Lipton does. But if we have a different situation where companies choose not to raise and lower its prices with Lipton because this is not a Godfather, Lipton's not a Godfather like we saw with Hershey's, then Lipton's curve is going to be NN. Because now, even a small increase in price from this level up to there, we see a big drop-off in the quantity demanded for Lipton because nobody else raised their prices. So now we combine the fact when Lipton raises the price that A, at a higher price, people are going to demand less Lipton, and B, people will switch from Lipton to other iced teas, right? Now, so it's a much more elastic, a flatter demand curve. What happens if Lipton were to lower its price a little bit from its 80-cent level and nobody else does? Now now we kick in a big elastic change on the increase because now you're going to be able to have more quantity demanded because you have a lower price, but also because you're going to be stealing customers away from other firms. They didn't lower the price, you did, you're going to steal for your substitutes. So, inelastic curve YY if firms do change their prices along with Lipton. Elastic demand curve NN if firms do not copy Lipton's price changes. Here's where we get the kink. Here's where we learn something about oligopolistic behavior. Imagine that you're Lipton. No, imagine that you're Lipton's competitor. How about? Imagine that who else makes iced tea? Country Time? Well, imagine that you're Country Time, like they make lemonade, but let's say they make iced tea. I don't know. No, it's Erica's iced tea. Lipton, you read in the news, Lipton is raising their price. And you're like, wow, that's surprising. I thought we were rolling along pretty well, both of us offering our tea for 80 cents a unit, whatever. Your costs remain the same. Would you also raise your price?
Yeah.
What would happen if you didn't raise your price? If you're a competitor of Lipton's?
Oh wait, hang on. Would I want to raise my price? Well, if I did raise the price, then no, I wouldn't want to raise the price because I think I would lose people. I think I would lose customers.
Okay, but Lipton raised their price. What could you do if you didn't raise your price? What would happen?
If I didn't raise
If you
my
did not.
price, if I didn't raise my price, well, I may not make as much revenue, but
Sure you will. You'll make just as much as before per unit, but you're gonna steal some of Lipton's customers because they raised their price and you didn't. So your price now is relatively cheaper compared to Lipton.
Isn't that what I said before?
I don't know.
Okay.
So
I wouldn't want to raise my price.
no, you wouldn't.
Okay.
Now, if Lipton raised its price because of a increase in input costs, and like for sugar, and you also face that same sugar, you probably would feel compelled to raise your price. But if they rose it because their workers that now are paid more, and that doesn't apply to your workers, you didn't give your people a raise, then now you can keep it there and steal there. So Lipton, in this case, this part right here does apply to Lipton. Lipton will try hard to not raise their price, but if they do, they will be faced with this situation because you, their competitor, will not raise your price if you can. So for Lipton, this segment of their demand curve is due to the fact that if they do raise their price, they're probably going to be stuck losing a lot of customers because their competitors, like Erica's Iced Tea, are not going to raise their price. Now, if you're Eric's Iced Tea and you read that Lipton is lowering its price, what are you probably going to do? Because
Otherwise people are going to go and get cheaper.
yeah, Lipton's going to steal your customers in that case. So when price falls, you are probably going to follow suit because you're afraid to lose your customers. So now we're looking at this YY demand curve that represented what if the two companies do mimic each other. And that is why we have this kinked demand curve. Lipton faces NK, that portion right there, if they do raise their price, but if they lower the price, they're faced with a slope like this KY. Oligopolies behave this way. They have sticky prices. You know, think about Coke, Pepsi. I think about, to a lesser extent, cars and airplanes. They don't change the price of their products very often. And part of that is because their behavior is interconnected, is interchanged. And they just as soon all keep their prices together and relatively high as well. They could use illegal means or legal means to do that, I suppose. But so this is why we have the kinked demand curve. Different behavior from the firms when you raise price versus lower price. Questions?
Wait, what's NK? NK is when Lipton does what?
And well, because NK has Y values that are all greater than the previous price, that shows their demand curve should they raise their price from previous. So if they raise their price from 80 cents, it'll show a quick drop off in your X, your output, because other companies are stealing their customers. KY shows that at prices lower than 80 cents, there will be an increase, but a much less of a slope, less of a elastic effect, because other companies have also lowered their prices and you can't really steal them as easily. I'll show you this real quick. Now, the MR curve, the marginal revenue, is different. When you have two different slopes, basically you have two segments of this demand curve for your oligopoly, like we have there for Lipton, we have here, you're going to have actually two marginal revenue curves. I mean, they're basically parallel, but you have this little gap here because of how different the behavior is with prices that are greater or less than. All you need to know is that because of this gap, it helps us to understand again why prices tend to be sticky, tend to not change very much in oligopoly. Because even if your cost, your sugar, whatever they do change, this marginal cost curve can fluctuate, can move up or down anywhere between that gap and still have MR equals MC. Anywhere between this price and this price, you know, that cost, that marginal cost level is still technically MR equals MC and would not change the quantity wouldn't change the price, it wouldn't change any behavior here whatsoever. You still would have the demand curve, this quantity here hitting at K, which tells us the price that would be offered. You would have to have a significant increase in costs, so that, like right up here, finally the marginal cost would intersect with marginal revenue at a very high situation, and then now this company would choose, okay, we've got to make a change because of our high cost. We're going to drop our profit maximizing quantity to 2,000 and now charge 90 cents because that's where it hits the demand curve up there. And finally, one more oligopoly situation. And this one actually, again, is going to where we're going to be mimicking monopoly. It's called a cartel. Have you heard of a cartel?
Oh, heard of it once or twice.
Okay. Drug cartel, usually, right? And the reason it's called a drug cartel is it's basically, it tries to monopolize the drug production and distribution and sales in a certain area, but they're not the only company industry to do this. I just read in National Geographic, I think it was, about the drug wars that they're having in Mexico right now. And it's very important that they keep their turf and that they don't allow some of the rival gangs. Towards the end of our human geography, you probably saw the map that showed where the different drug cartels are in Mexico. Anyway, I'm not going to use drugs as an example. I'm going to use oil, a different drug that we're addicted to in this country. What happens if all of the oil producing countries, companies, try to work together and influence the price? And again, what price that they all want to share in this nice, higher than otherwise would be happening price. Here is the entire market. Notice the large quantities, let's say that's barrels of oil in an hour or a day or something like that. We'll just say day, even though it's probably way too small. Same thing as always. If we want to know oil producers and where they're going to produce, MR equals MC. Is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That tells us that the overall quantity in the market will be 14,000. We go up to the demand curve to see what the price will be at that quantity, $8. Completely unrealistic for oil. Let's say it's a cup of oil, or I don't know, something like that. I guess that would be a couple of gallons of oil, I don't know. Now, in a cartel, you have to make sure that all of the countries stay in line and don't mess this up. You're going to tell each, if this is the 14,000 barrels that we need produced, they have to make sure that they don't go over that 14,000 barrels. What happens if they would produce 28,000 barrels? What would go wrong? If you increase your supply quite a bit, we shift our supply curve out to the right basically, what happens that they wouldn't like?
Price would go down?
Price would go down, absolutely. If they want to keep that artificial price, they have to make sure that they don't overproduce. So they have to keep everyone in line. So, can you think of an oil cartel? There's a famous one.
Like gas station names?
No, like the oil producing countries, they belong to an organization. Well, that's the big one. It rhymes with GOPEC.
OPEC.
OPEC, right. So this is OPEC, and they're going to tell each country how many barrels of oil that they can produce, and let's say we're Kuwait. So now over here, this panel B is looking at, okay, what's the situation in one member country? We'll say it's Kuwait. Out of the 14,000 total barrels, they decide to assign 2,000 barrels to Kuwait. So 1/7 of all the production is going to come out of Kuwait. And Kuwait, you gotta be cool with this. You gotta make sure that you do this, because if you produce too much, then that will affect world oil prices and we all lose. And Kuwait's like, okay, yes, we got it. So we look at their situation at 2,000, average total cost per barrel is 2. We go up to the price that we're getting over here, which is 8. So $6 profit per barrel. Pretty awesome. And so total revenue will be 2,000 times 8, or 16,000. The cost is just 2 times 2. Pretty nice profit right there. So hopefully Kuwait will be happy.